Okay, let's see if anybody joins in here. Give this a little bit, see if anybody joins. Hello? I know things may look a little different right now. My phone broke the other day, so I'm kind of, until I can get down to the store and get a new phone, I'm kind of on bare minimum here as I try to work. Now, the air conditioner's running in the background also, so don't mind the sound if you hear that. But yeah, my phone was 5 years old anyway, so it was time for an upgrade. Now I just got to go do it. So, so what's going on out there in the Titanic community? Is there anything in particular people want to talk about? Maybe. Part 2 educational video. To which one exactly? I've done a lot of Titanic videos over the years. Some of them I've actually gotten rid of off this channel after everything happened to it a few years ago, but now I'm starting to rebuild slowly here. The breakup. Yeah, the breakup. See, I know I did one on the TikTok, which until I can get a new phone, I'm not going to be able to do TikTok very well. Hardly at all, pretty much. But as for the breakup, you have to wonder, you know, going with the actual commonly held theory on the breakup, or do you go with the V split theory, which does have some evidence to it, though most people refute that one? Is the V split, as it's referred to, I said, if you watch Titanic's Achilles heel, I believe is the name of it, or it might be Missing Pieces. Either one of those. Those are probably the two best uh, documentaries on the subject. But I believe it's Achilles heel actually goes into a little more detail on the V split theory and presents actual evidence from the wreck that shows the possibility. But as for the actual breakup itself, uh, you know, I still don't personally myself. This is just me, just my opinion. But personally myself, I do not believe in the forward of the third funnel break as people more refer to these days. It's what's more commonly accepted these days. While there was great stress in that area of the ship, there was nothing in that area to initiate, to the brake to start the opening, except for the expansion joint, which was aft of that third funnel. And they knew this all the way back in 1912 when the Olympic was brought in to be refitted. They found fissures in her expansion joints, which were identical to Titanic's. And then when they were working on the Britannic, they completely redesigned the expansion joints on her. Instead of having this very sharp, crude split that does kind of like this, which any engineer will tell you that's no good. The Britannic, they put a larger rounded bulb at the end of the expansion joint to reduce that stress. And that's one reason why. And they also added a lot more. Instead of just 2 like Olympic and Titanic had, the Britannic had 5 expansion joints. That's one reason why when she sank, she didn't break apart when her stern came out of the water as it did. You know. Now, of course, the Britannic still broke off at the well deck, and then Titanic bent sharply at the well deck, and the Olympic even had a permanent list in her aft well deck after her collision with the Hawk, which shows that the Olympic class had a very weak well deck area in their design for some reason. It's hard to, after all these years, there's no physical evidence left. It's hard to really know what that weakness was, but there was obviously some sort of weakness in that well deck area. Made a video about where it broke at. Yeah, there's a lot of talk on where it breaks and how it breaks, and I know one thing for me is the coal. You go to just about any Titanic museum or whatever, their gift shops are always selling coal. But when you really sit down and think about it, that coal's almost certainly not from the Titanic. I mean, first off, Titanic only had a limited amount of coal because there was a coal strike, and they had to take coal from multiple other ships just to get enough to get Titanic on her maiden voyage. They burned through a lot of that coal on their voyage. There was the coal bunker fire, which had to be shoveled out and thrown into a boiler before it spread. So that ate up a lot of coal. Plus, when you look at when the ship broke, really only one coal bunker was affected. It was ripped open. And coal is a very, very porous material. It does not do well in water. So after more than 100 years, where's all this coal still coming from that they're able to sell at these museums and everything? I mean, it's a great piece of memorabilia, and it makes a nice conversation starter. I myself have a piece of coal, but yeah, it's not really from the Titanic, in my opinion. Can I prove that? No. It's almost impossible to prove, but that's just my opinion. The coal is not actually from the Titanic. So, yeah. Ugh. I know I had a comment on here on YouTube yesterday or the day before, I think it was, talking about the split theory, and the dude got mad and went to town calling me all kinds of names. The split theory, I mean, it's a great story, and it's, it really, is dramatic, and if you're into conspiracies and stuff, it really makes you think, but it's not true. And it's been proven multiple times that it's not true. uh, you have, besides the fact that you have the number 401, which was Titanic's yard number, on multiple items between the stern and the bow. You have fully documented all three nameplates, at both of them at the bow and the one at the stern has been fully documented. Those nameplates are carved into the steel, not mounted on top of them, as a lot of people try to claim. And then, plus the general layout of Titanic versus Olympic was very different anyway. From the bridge, which on the wreck, you can clearly see the flat wheelhouse wall remains. It's there, and then the telemotor sits behind it right there in the center. And, it's perfectly flat, square. Olympic had a rounded front end, where Titanic had the square, flat front end. The Turkish baths on F deck were completely redesigned on the Titanic from what they were on Olympic. B deck, at the time Titanic sank, the B deck on Olympic was a full open promenade from forward well deck to aft well deck, completely open. And on Titanic, they extended those rooms out, and then they created the Parisian Cafe and on the aft end of the B deck and everything, which was not there on the Titanic or on the Olympic. So, yeah, the amount of evidence that shows, yes, it was the Titanic, there was no switch, is just ridiculous at this point that people still believe it, in my opinion. I think she broke in front of the third funnel. Well, I think she broke at 3, and I'm not saying there wasn't some, breaking and some separation of hull plates and stuff forward of the third funnel and everything, but the primary break, the initial break, in my opinion, was at the expansion joint. And I believe she may have actually broke off in 4 chunks, actually. The main bow section that we have, the stern section that we have still, and then 2 small midsection pieces with meeting at the expansion joint, a little bit in forward of the expansion joint and a little bit aft of the expansion joint. So I believe she might have actually broke off in 4 different pieces, technically speaking. And I know another area of the wreck that I've discussed with people is when you go down to the bow section, on the starboard side, just below the well deck, you'll find that big, what they call the blowout, the big hole in the side of the ship. And, a lot of people talk about that's from the bow bending as it hits the bottom. And yes, basically that's true. But you also have to understand that area is most likely iceberg damage as well. It's within the range from the prow to the 6th boiler room where it was. And we know ice fell in the well decks. People were playing with the ice at first. So we know ice fell in that area. So I believe that iceberg may have hit the side of the Titanic right there and popped a few rivets, but being above the water line, they had no sign of it ever. And the ship just went down without them ever knowing about that part of the collision. That makes sense. She probably did break in 4. Yeah, like I said, in James Cameron's film, there's a scene I always love right during the breakup. As the ship's starting to come apart, they cut to one of the interior rooms. It's the smoking lounge, I believe it is. And you see the support columns in the room shatter and the roof drops. And I believe that's what actually happened in the midsection. I believe the D-deck dining saloon area being the most wide open room on the ship, people reported hearing what they called explosions or implosions, very loud crashes. And they thought it was boilers exploding. But I think that was upper decks collapsing. I think all that room in the D deck dining saloon, midship, right where the break happens, I think C deck lost its support and crashed. With nothing supporting B deck, it crashed. Nothing supporting A, it crashed. All of that weight crashed down to E deck, which stops at the bulkheads. The bulkheads provide, and and so when the ship begins to break apart, that midsection that's open to the water begins to flood, and it pulls it in. And like I said, if you will watch Achilles' Heel, I believe it is, they explain this as well. And with no space there, the upper deck, the boat deck, just crumbles. And that, I think that the aft sun deck on the bow section that is bent down sharply at the wreck, I think that acted as a bit of a rudder to that fall and stall motion as she went down. A kind of a Bernoulli principle, if you will. The water would rush over the deck and it would create a low pressure and it would pull the deck up. And when the deck came up, the bow went like this, and then the deck would fall and the bow would go down. And it repeated that pattern. And kind of the same with the stern, with the way the poop deck folded over as well. As it went under the water and that water rushed up under the poop deck into that third class lounge that was under there, it rips that deck off the frame and peels it back. And then that initiates that huge corkscrew that it did as it went down. And that's basically my thought on that area of the breakup anyway. But as I've said, go watch Titanic's Achilles' Heel and The Missing Pieces, I believe it is. Those two really help explain that idea. The only part they really get wrong is when they're talking about the V-split, they mention about the double bottom flooding. And that really wouldn't have happened because the double bottom was already flooded. The double bottom held 44 fresh and saltwater tanks for use on board. And there was very little area inside that double bottom that was empty air. So even if there was grounding damage, where it went up and over the iceberg like that, which I do believe it did, that really wouldn't have played much of a role, in my opinion, in the sinking, since the double bottom was already flooded. It would have the water would have still came into the ship. And in fact, there was, in the mailroom, I believe it was one of the rooms, forward end, but more midship, not onto the side of the hull, actually did report water coming up through the floor, not from the side, which gave indication that there may have been grounding damage. But I said, even if there was, you're just going to break those tanks open, and the water that's in the tanks is going to go inside the ship. So you're still going to get water inside the ship either way. But those documentaries are some very good ones to watch. I know I've been talking about She Broke before. There's a game called Floating Sandbox, and you probably see it all over TikTok. It actually is a fairly good game. I mean, it's not a whole lot of detail in the graphics and everything. It's very 2D simple, but you can actually replicate the Titanic sinking, the Britannic sinking. You can replicate a lot of things very, very well, almost accurate, almost perfectly accurate in that game. And I have sunk the Titanic, as you will, in there several times and nearly perfectly replicated the sinking all the way down to the split, all the way down to the wreck itself, with the bow planing away, landing nose first and bending backwards, the stern landing rudder first and basically disintegrating as it hits. We want to see a glass theory. Let's see a glass theory. That being a flat calm, but there's actually that there may have been some refraction issues that created a false horizon that also hid the iceberg from view for a while till they were almost right on top of it. Yeah, Cameron's theory, as I've said in one of my TikTok videos, I don't look at Cameron as an expert. I don't. I know a lot of people follow him blindly and just everything he says, like with the whole thing with this sub incident. You know, he talked about how it mirrors Titanic because Titanic steamed full speed into an ice field, even though they had warnings. And even he knows that's not true. He put a line in his film where Ismay asks Smith, why have they not lit the last boilers? And Smith tells him, we're making excellent time. I've not seen the need. And it was a perfect line to illustrate they never reached their top speed while they were sailing. They weren't built for speed or taking the blue ribbon or any of that. You know. And as for the warnings, yes, there were warnings that came in that didn't make it to the bridge, but it wasn't the Marconi officers, job to make sure they got to the bridge as soon as they came in. The Marconi officers were there for the passengers' use primarily. They took warnings to the bridge as they needed them, as they had the ability to. And we already know that warnings got to the bridge because Smith had them. Passengers testified at the inquiries that they overheard Ismay and Andrews and Smith and some of the officers talking about iceberg warnings and everything. The double bottom theory. Well, as I said with the double bottom, the grounding damage part, yes, it's, I do believe it went over, but again, there was already water tanks inside the double bottom. That's why it was called the tank. That's why where the boilers sit, right on top of that, is called the tank top deck. It's a tank. It's water tanks. But as for now, Cameron's area of the double bottom with those two sections kind of holding on, banana peeling off as he calls it. I do follow that one a little bit. I do believe that one. I don't think they would have peeled off as much as he says they did. But we found two huge full sections of double bottom in the debris field, which show that yes, double bottom peeled away from the ship at some point. There is the proof down at the wreck site in the debris field. And, while Titanic Truths worked for years on salvaging the bow section, I don't think that's possible anymore. The bow's too far gone. It's too deteriorated. It's falling apart. I'm more for cleaning and just getting loose debris, like those double bottom sections. Bring those up, bring boilers, cranes, anchors, whatever you can get to study it and, put it in a museum to keep it all together. Don't split it up. Yeah, no, the sub and the Titanic itself, no, there's the only similarity is the location. Yeah, as I've said, his statements about the similarities and ignoring warnings and all that, you know, Stockton Rush with the Titan sub, he blatantly ignored warnings about the issues with his sub. Titanic, they had the warnings, they knew about the warnings, they just, were doing what they normally do by the book, what any ship would have done at that time. They weren't ignoring them. They had them, they were aware of them, and they were ready to make corrections if they had to make corrections. Uh, but yeah, it's just but yeah, as I was saying though about salvaging them, I'm more for just cleaning the wreck today. Yeah, it didn't make the big peel. No, I don't think it made the big peel either. I know Ballard has discussed the idea of cleaning the wreck. I know he's even discussed painting the wreck. I don't know how you would paint the wreck 2.5 miles down below the ocean, but I mean, not unless you created and installed that biodome modular dome thing that I shared in some of my TikTok videos, which is a wild and crazy idea that would most likely never happen, probably wouldn't even work. But I mean, if it did, it would be at least one way to preserve the wreck. But I need to get back to work on tickets for the attraction, man. I have been, I've got three of the class tickets done. I got three more to go, 3 or 4 more to go. I don't remember. Uh, Make three. I've got all of first class, authentic and standard accommodation, and I've got third class standard accommodation done. Uh, but I still got all of second class and then the last half of third class to do. Let's see. I think the captain moved the ship to the side. Yes, Yes, Smith ordered a course change to go about 10 miles south to try to avoid the ice flows, but the ice had traveled further south than anybody had anticipated. And so Smith which is a great indication that Smith had warnings of ice and he took appropriate action to try to avoid the ice, which again is not anything close to what Rush and the Titan submersible went through. Numerous people contacted OceanGate and Rush and was telling them, you can't launch this thing, it's not safe. You have to get it approved, you have to go through the proper channels, and he just wouldn't listen. But it also goes to show you a little piece of paper don't mean anything, because Rush had degrees in engineering and all of that. He was supposed to have known what he was doing. And it just shows you a piece of paper don't mean anything anymore. Just because somebody has that special piece of paper from a school that tells them they've learned a certain course, it doesn't mean they're an expert in it. And it's sad that 5 people, including Rush himself, had to lose their lives to show everybody. But it was inevitable. The carbon fiber hull and the plexiglass window at the front of the front bell, were doomed from the start. Every single dive they took weakened it a little bit more and a little bit more. And after about, I think they said 13 dives, we finally met its breaking point, and it broke last week. It was inevitable. Another thing with Russia's sub, you know, most subs are a sphere. You get even support of pressure all the way around all sides. It's the most stable, strongest, shape you can use for that kind of stuff is a sphere. That's why the mirrors like Alvin, their passenger compartment is a perfect sphere. What Rush did was he cut that sphere in half and then elongated it. So you had all the pressure on this end and all the pressure on this end, normal with any sphere. But then that cylinder down the center, it had good pressure with strength this way, but it was this pressure strength going this way. That's a flat surface, and that does not work at those kind of pressures. You're talking between 5 and 6,000 psi of pressure at the depth where Titanic lies. And carbon fiber cannot take that. Even with titanium backing it up, it's not going to happen. The problem with James Cameron and his research is it's got to be literally his research. He gets something in his mind, it has to stick there. I know I've got the up here in the DVDs behind me here. I have the 3D Blu-ray of Titanic with the 100th anniversary final word, as he called it, which it was never his final word, documentary. And he has actual naval architects, and they tell him in the documentary that they professionally disagree with his ideas, that he is not correct, and he still shoots them down. We have found through naval architecture, and Roger Long, who I have on Facebook, I've talked to many times, who was on Achilles' Heel, Missing Pieces, several documentaries, was one of them, one of several experts who found Titanic never reached more than 11, 12 angles out of the degrees of angle out of the water. It wasn't this huge 45 degree like we used to think it was. And even in the final word and his animation that he created that everybody shares now, he still more than doubled that from 11 degrees to 23 degrees of angle out of the water before she broke. Because that's what he wanted. He thought that would look good. It doesn't matter if it looks good. It's what is accurate, what actually happened. But, and it's like Mythbusters. When Mythbusters proved that Jack could have fit on that, paneling with Rose, he got upset. So, and he got mad. And here last year, he went and created his own documentary to prove himself right. And instead, he proved himself wrong. That, yes, Jack could have got on that piece of paneling with Rose and survived. No, the 25 degrees is not. As I said, if you will watch Achilles' Heel and Missing Pieces, I said Roger Long, who was in those, I know he was in Achilles' Heel, and I believe he was in Missing Pieces as well. I have him on Facebook, and I've talked with him about it several times. And he's very adamant. No, she only reached, at most, she maybe 14 degrees out of the water. The hull is not designed to deal with that kind of pressure, that kind of stress. If 20, even as low as 20 degrees, she would have broke long before she got there because the stress would have been way too great. Because you understand, you have the reciprocating engines, the generators, all this machinery in the stern section that is coming up out of the water. there's nowhere for that weight to go except down. And the best way to go down is to break it. You know, you know, the expansion joints, as I've talked about, open to about 10 inches at max, what they're designed. And those would have been fully maxed out open long before the propellers even broke out of the water. You know, the forward funnel, the forward expansion joint opened, and the after, they would have opened around the same point, same time. But because that forward expansion joint was lower in the water, kind of underwater, it provided more support to that section of the ship. Where the stern section was higher up and kind of out of the water, it didn't have as much support, and that's where it began to split. I mean, you're good on your opinions and everything. I know that's one thing I've always talked about is, everybody's got their opinions, but she in the Titanic community, there's so much toxicity that if you don't believe the perfect right theory from the right person, they will just rip you to shreds. And I try not to have that toxicity in my groups and everything. Yeah. I'm more at the 11, 12 degree idea is where I stand. You know, you have 3 huge brass rudders that weigh, uh, combined about maybe 300 ton, maybe not that 200, few hundred ton. I don't know the exact number right offhand, but plus you have the solid steel rudder that adds several hundred tons back to the, and the framework around that system, which was basically solid steel as well, adding several hundred tons. That whole very tip of the stern, you're looking at, close, 500 to 1,000 tons of weight. Not to mention the weight of the reciprocating engines, the pipe, the propeller shafts, turbines, the generators, all of that. There was so much weight in that stern section that that midsection just really couldn't have held it. But yeah, that's why if you do which I've done a lot of model testing. I took actual models of the Titanic, and I very meticulously added in bulkheads and everything that needed to be added to properly use them. I've properly weighted them to scale everything in order to make sure that it was as accurate as possible. And I know one thing I found while doing model testing, which was really fun, was, and it's one thing that helps us know that the bow and the stern were still connected when after they separated and they pulled the stern down, is because if they had broke clean of each other and the stern stayed at the surface and it had stayed upright, normal, in the water, theoretically speaking, it actually could have continued to float on its own. Model testing that I have done myself has shown that water will enter that break, but when it hits that first bulkhead, it stops. And there's not enough weight through water or debris or anything to pull the brake down enough that water spills over that bulkhead. Theoretically, if they had split completely and the stern remained upright at the surface, it could have floated indefinitely until Carpathia arrived. And the hundreds of people that clambered up her stern up to the poop deck, probably would have ended up surviving at that point. But you know, because the bow stayed connected, it pulled the stern down. Water was able to go over that first bulkhead in the stern and restart the cascade process that caused it to flood and go down. Plus, it also didn't really remain upright. It was upright at first, but as it sank, it began to roll until Charles Jowen, the chief baker, actually stood on the side of the poop deck, just on the starboard side, as it rolled and went under, and he was able to step off in the water without ever even getting his hair wet. And of course, he had so much alcohol in his system, he never even felt that cold water. And he swam for hours until the Carpathia arrived. You know, he spent like 6 hours in the water, basically unaffected because of the alcohol in his system. But yeah, Jowen was able to ride the ship as it went down. And in the movie, you see this. He's where Jack and Rose are right at the very stern, right at the flag. And you see the man in the white uniform. That's Charles Jowen. That's the chief baker. Cameron put him back there at the stern for, because at that time, that's how we thought she sank. So for him to step off and not get his hair wet, it would have had to have happened from back there. But now we kind of understand that it was more off towards the side of the ship, not the very end of the ship. But it also goes to show there was no suction as the ship went under, as the movie portrayed. When it went under there, Now Lightoller did testify that he was sucked down into a vent a couple times, but that's more water rushing into an empty area and him just getting caught in the current. That's not really suction. Oh, those itches. But yeah, I know one thing I've always thought about doing, and if I did, it would have to be after I get new phone, new cam with a hell of a lot better camera, new equipment, everything I need. But I've thought about doing a breakdown of the movie Titanic and discuss what Cameron got right and what Cameron got wrong with that film. Yeah, Titanic did go vertical, just right about as she went under. See, now in the movie they always show her standing way up perfectly like this, and then she just goes straight down. And no, I've shown in images on Titanic Truth's Facebook before that, given where she split, in order for that huge, she split like right here. Say, that's the split. This is the bow. This is the stern. That's the split. For her to be here, she's got to stand basically on top of the water. There's nothing under the water to get this view. It's dramatic, but there's nothing under the water in reality because the vast, like 70% of a structure is going to be under the water, just like it is with an iceberg, all of that. The water line, where if it's broke here, the water line is going to be way up here. The water line would have been more at the aft well deck. And model testing again has shown that it does go vertical, but right as the very last few feet enter the water. But yeah, the big iconic image of the stern section on its own, standing on the surface of the water, no, that never happened. That can't happen. Ugh.